afternoon. This is your Pan-African show called Afreeqa and your host Katsalork Sefu. I'm excited about our guest today. Could you please introduce yourself and welcome?
Thank you. Thank you, Katsala, for having me. My name is Hadra Ahmed Ibrahim. I am an Emmy Award-winning producer, journalist, and a self-proclaimed Pan-African.
Hallelujah. So now I'm going to, just so our audience would know who Hadra is, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the journalism life. And then from journalism, you went into production, right? Mm-hmm. Producing. So if you could just give us a little history.
I've always wanted to be a journalist. That I had no doubt in what I wanted since I was at school. And then I had to just follow that path. When I went to university, that's what I studied. But then I started out as print journalist. And then, I had to do a lot of researching, a lot of reading, a lot of work on gaining a lot of experience on the work, but also go abroad and get further education in broadcasting journalism in order to be able to produce good stories, competitive stories, and storylines that are very compelling to the audience and most importantly to the African community. So that's briefly my journey to journalism and broadcasting.
So now we go to Ethiopian women and journalism. Now, we do have a lot of them in our country, but I would like to know, what are your hardships as a woman, because I'm sure there are, and not only your hardship, but in getting news, first-hand news. What do you have to do in order to do that? Do you have to know people, or could you just go to whatever institution and say, okay, I'm so-and-so, and I would like to cover this story?
I wish it was always the latter that you just mentioned.
But it doesn't happen that way.
No.
Really?
Yes, mainly because they don't really, believe in your ability to tell stories, their stories. Yes, of course, as a woman, I believe that for the best profession to be is being a journalist, because we're able to create connections, communications. We're able to make people feel comfortable to talk to us and get information. When I say comfortable, I don't mean anything else, but we're able to sympathize.
I agree with you.
Yeah,
yes, exactly
because that's what the first thing that comes to people's minds. And that is also one of the main challenges as women journalists that we face, because every time you want to do a story, you go to, try to interview some people, not all of them. Some people would see it, in a completely different way and say, why don't we talk about this over dinner?
They take it to a whole other...
Exactly, that harmless, very nice way of, approaching women journalists. So even though it's a very small portion, or even for some people it's a lot, that really puts a lot of psychological pressure on women journalists. And this happens all over the world, not just in Ethiopia. But what makes Ethiopian women journalists very unique is that it's a profession that's mainly dominated by men. If you look at all the executives, I think except two, which is Capital Newspaper and Shaggar FM, that have women executives. Otherwise, all the media outlets are run by men. And all the editorial decisions, policies are decided by men. And so when you see that, you just see the lack of women representation in these spaces. And that comes, I believe, from my experience, that is deeply rooted in women not being capable of being a journalist as the men. So the women have to do extra 2-3 times than the men
to
prove themselves. Yeah. But then even on top of that, it's not just for young women, female journalists, but it's also for women who have children, women who have family to support. So there is also that pressure. But in all of that, I truly admire especially Ethiopian journalists, especially women Ethiopian journalists, for their resilience, perseverance to push and break those barriers and able to be journalists, practice the profession they love.
Now, have you in any way during your journey come across anything that, like, you wanted to make a story of something that had happened and you went, or you did what you had to do to get that story and you were declined, or you weren't able to cover that story? Because a couple of years ago there was the story, something had happened, and that story was told by a journalist stating that she got that information from BBC. And it was about something in Ethiopia.
In Ethiopia, yeah.
So I could not understand it. I didn't know. So I went up to her and I said, why would we do that? I mean, this is our country. Shouldn't we be the first ones to actually talk about our story? And she said, no, I tried so hard, but they would not allow me. They wouldn't give her an interview. Therefore, she had to go to an outside media to say that they said that our people are da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
Now, to me, that's very sad.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that. It's, usually when we can't find information and then we just, and then we pick up stories, we quote the sources. So it's called wire story, or you syndicate the story, but there's so many reasons for why that happens. Yes, one of the biggest issue that Ethiopian journalists face in order to produce their story properly is access to information. It's not like a secret that African leaders, African institutions usually give priorities to media outlets, foreign media outlets, or media outlets that are considered to be big and influential than their own people. But what really, at the same time pisses me off is, as Africans, even as part of Agenda 2063, the focus is telling the stories, African stories by Africans.
Our way.
Our way. We're always saying every day, every single day. I think I'm like, part of why the African Union was established is because to represent Africans, to have voice in the international stage. But when you look at it, like fast forward 50-something years after that, we're still talking about telling African stories by Africans. And that shows you why. African reporters, African producers, African videographers, video journalists, in all the platforms, we're always struggling to get information. That's because we don't get them. So, and then what we do is we just go and quote the BBC.
You want that information.
Yeah, and it's not even just about stories that are happening in Ethiopia being quoted from the BBC, but it also stories that happen in Kenya or in Uganda. So we just go, according to the BBC, the election in Kenya, and how many of us do even know, like as Ethiopians, how many of us do we even know, like, that we say like America, the world's democracy, but how many of us know that Ghana is Africa's democracy? That's basically the storyline in every possible way. How many of us can name media outlets within Africa?
Right. That was going to be my next question. As journalists in Ethiopia, or really any part of Africa, is there like a network that you guys have where you actually just mentioned that there isn't, but I'm hoping at least you yourself personally has a few people that you know in and around Africa or even in the diaspora that you could work with?
I'm going to praise myself a little bit.
Good.
Okay. Yeah. Because I wanted to be a journalist, because I knew that was what I wanted to do. I had to really try every possible means for me to expose myself to the media outlets, especially in different African countries, in addition to the international ones. So because of that, one of the things I got to do was to become a correspondent. So I used to work for an Indian media called INS, and I used to cover the region. and another South African media called African News Agency, and I used to also cover the region. So because of my, persistent, my annoying commitment to being a journalist and to telling stories, African stories, that I was able to communicate with different African journalists in different parts of the continent. Whenever I travel to a certain African country, I know who to call to understand what's happening in the country. Even when something is happening, for instance, during the election in Kenya, the last election, I had someone to talk to, a Kenyan journalist who was covering the story, and I was asking him what was going on, what was happening. But in addition to the journalists in these African countries, I also know people in different parts, not just politicians or business people, but also people, citizens who experience the lives being an African in these different parts of the continent. So I also talk to those people, and I would like to believe, again, this is where I'm praising myself. It's because I'm really dedicated in doing that. But one of the things that really always, really that makes me sad is, as Ethiopian journalists, we don't strive to do that. We don't strive to,
meet new people.
Exactly. and then as journalists, we don't really strive to go out and work with other African journalists or work with within African media outlets. Or even, like, for instance, you said, for a story that's happened in Ethiopia, this journalist quoted the BBC, right? But how many news outlets in Ethiopia, media outlets in Ethiopia, have you seen quoting another African media? So for instance, like SABC is a massive South African media outlet. They cover the continent. How many Ethiopian media outlets have you seen pick a story from SABC and report on the news that happens within Africa? But you see stories being quoted from CGTN Africa, or BBC and other international media outlets. Yeah, and I think it's about pushing that boundary for all of us, for every journalist, for all of us to just find a way to connect with each other and to create a connection between ourselves.
I think it's very important, and the reason why I said this was recently, I don't know if you know this, I was a bit disappointed because, since we brought up AU has a media fellowship.
Yeah.
I got the opportunity to actually go and interview some of these journalists that came from the continent. Our continent is 55. There were only 14 fellows.
Oh.
And when I say 14, like, there were two journalists from one country.
From a country, yeah.
From a country, which we thought it should have been open. And I guess it's the first one, so going forward we'd see. And of course my first question is, where are the Ethiopians? I mean, it's happening in Ethiopia, and why aren't our journalists involved? And the reason why I brought it up is because of what you just said. We do not go out to actually meet. Forget going into the media fellowship, but just knowing that these people are here and making it a fact to go to AU and actually meet these people. So when I interviewed them, the one thing that I asked that they had said was, it was so good because now they met somebody here that they could actually talk to.
Work with,
exactly, ask questions. However you want to see it, but they have a link.
Yeah.
So that's a very good point. And the other point, this is bringing you to the earlier conversation that you had. You had said that when we say we have to tell our own story, our own way, for the last 3 years, we've been going crazy about fake news. This is not true. This is true. This is right? So after 3 years, you still have the difficulty of covering your own stories. How do you think we're going to get out of that? If you have a suggestion, maybe somebody would hear and say, oh, that's a good idea. Because we have to. The sooner we do, the better. Because we talked about the demonstration that we had recently, So who covered that? Were we able to go into the middle of the demonstrators and actually cover the demonstration?
Well, you get invitations for stuff like that, and you can go and report it and cover the story. But that's not Ethiopia's story. That's not the story I want to report or cover.
Yeah.
I want to go talk to the people in different parts of the country. I want to be able to move all over the country and show our history, our culture, our tradition, But the problem is, this is something, look, I'm not the only one who's saying this. It's everyone. It's media development. It's how the media development agencies are functioning in Ethiopia. There is the one thing is access to information. Access to information does not mean for me to come and sit with you and interview you. No, it's access to locations. It's access to the people. It's to be able to drive from Addis to wherever and then not being able to stop on the road and then being, told to return or being asked what your intention is to do this story. It's not that. You cannot always focus on politics and drought and famine and all the bad things that are happening right now or that have happened in the past, the ethnic divisions, the political differences. That shouldn't be the topic, at least for us, for Ethiopians, for Africans, to cover about our own countries, to cover about, for me, for instance, I am no longer interested in covering politics. To tell you the truth, I am no longer interested in talking about any division and all of that. You know why? Because the local medias, from the government TV and radio stations to the private ones, they're all talking about it.
So people have to hear a different side of Ethiopia.
Yes, that's what I mean. And then we can't always and then say, we're saying, fake news. Hands off. We're saying we don't want we don't want these media outlets to cover our stories and all these fake news that are being reported by these international media outlets. But then at the same time, when they do report good things, or when they come to the country to report on anything, they're the ones who are given the first opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's not fair.
I mean, as Ethiopian journalists, we should be able to have protection and then we should be able to have the permission, the paperwork that we need to move around. I mean, we don't need a paperwork really if we have an ID, if we have our company's letters or our media representative letters, we really don't need extra paper. But the thing is, the reality on the ground is you really do need an extra paper from the government for you to be able to move within the country and report and cover. But you don't get that opportunity. So you can't really say Ethiopian stories, fake news being reported while you're not allowing your own journalists, producers, documentary makers, filmmakers, creative minds, painters, musicians, all of that.
You name them.
Exactly, when you're not allowing them to tell their own story, to do their own story. This is an example that I always talk about whenever I get the chance, because I really love what he did. So Mulugeta, Mulugeta Ayene, when we were filming the documentary that won the Emmys, there were so many journalists from all over the world. Videographers, video journalists, photojournalists, reporters, everyone, they were all there covering the stories. But the only one who picked up that very unique story of that woman throwing a sand on her face is Mulugeta. Because he knows what that means. Because he knows the level of grief that the woman is going through. That's how she shows it. No international media outlet picked that up. Only he picked it up. Because he told...
It's his story.
It's his story. He told it. He showed that woman through his lens, which really won him an international recognition.
Wow, you see?
Yeah.
And he didn't take that picture thinking that he's going to get recognized, but it's because it touched him.
It touched him.
Exactly.
It's his identity. It's who he is.
He felt her
He
pain.
felt her pain, you know? And without putting aside our own beautiful culture, beautiful connection, all of that, we can't still be able to tell our own stories if we're able to get access to these locations, to these people, to, you know, everything that's around us.
I had questions, of course, about the Emmy, how it even made it to the Emmy. And now that you started talking about it itself, I would like to know what you had to go through to actually do that documentary. And while you did the documentary, was there anything, what we were talking about, meaning did they stop you or anything like that? Any experiences, good and bad, that happened? So, and I love the title.
Falling from the sky.
It's just, I mean,
Yeah.
it couldn't have been better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Couldn't have been another title.
No.
Who came up with the title?
One of the producers at ABC. So it's an ABC Niece's production, Disney. When they wanted to do the documentary, and they were trying to come to Ethiopia, but they were not allowed to come to Ethiopia, and they couldn't come at least. And then so they were looking for local partners to work with, and that's when we got in touch with them, and we filmed and produced the Ethiopian part of the story. The story covers Ethiopia, Indonesia, and the US, because the victims were from 30-something countries, and it was a big story, you know, as you can remember. While filming that documentary, it took a year, and you can imagine why it took that long.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons that we were not able to, if you look at the documentary, let me just walk you through briefly about the documentary. There is a massive difference between the content from Indonesia and the content from Ethiopia. The content from Indonesia is very rich. There are victim families and people who were impacted and affected by this incident, experts, and the Lion Air representatives, and also in every step of the way of that incident. For instance, from the moment the plane fell, when they discovered the black box, during when they were conducting their investigation, when they were contacting family members and, you know, returning the remains of their loved ones. All of this it's very rich when you look at it. It just shows you like what those people have been going through. Whereas when it comes to the Ethiopian content, we couldn't get an interview with the Ethiopian Airlines representatives. We couldn't get an interview with the investigators of Civil Aviation and Ministry of Transport. We couldn't get interviews with more than one family members. And because it was very difficult for us to talk about the plane and it's all the technical stuff, and there is only one aviation reporter in Ethiopia, who's Kale Jesus, we had to, you know, interview him. And because we didn't have different voices from Ethiopia, I had to be one of the interviewees in the documentary. So I was also part of the documentary. In addition to, you know, producing it and doing everything else, I had to do, you know, give an interview about the incident and what it meant to Ethiopia. And so in that process, this is one of the challenges that we faced. And two, we were actually stopped, and for a few hours we were a bit, you know, holed up somewhere because we wanted to film the crash site. And so security stopped us, but then we had to explain that we were not able to film that location because, one, it was a rainy season and the car couldn't go in. And so we had to walk for about 15 kilometers carrying camera gear, bags and everything. We had to walk all the way there But it was impossible to get close after that because the road became inaccessible for us. So we had to come back, and then, all of that incident happened. But we were able to talk to them, explain to them, and they were really understanding and accommodating to let us go. But so we had all these issues. It was the international media outlets used to get the investigative results, the preliminary investigative reports before the local reporters, because they had,
a hookup.
Yeah. So it was very difficult for us to do that. But, Nugusu, who is the director of photographer of the documentary, who also won the Emmys, he's an engineer and he understands technology very well. And because of that, we managed to do a lot of research. We knew which aspects of, what kind of documents do we need to read, do we need to understand in order to be able to tell a really good story. And so we had to do a lot of reading, we had to do a lot of talking, to pilots and different experts from different countries in order to understand what we were doing. Because the moment the Emmy won, one of the producers, he said, if it wasn't for you, this documentary would not have happened.
Period.
Mm-hmm. Because the Lion Air incident happened, it was only a few countries it was under the radar of few countries. It didn't really attract the international audience, just like as much as the Ethiopian incident did.
Why do you think?
Because one, there was a UN conference in Kenya, and because of the number of citizens that were on the plane, I think around 35 countries, from 35 countries, and also because the plane flew from South Africa, it landed, and then it took off to Kenya. So it was a normal flight from South Africa to Ethiopia, but and then they didn't understand what happened, what went wrong. In order to understand that issue, that technical and software issue, we had to do a lot of researching. But more than that, Ethiopia showed its power in the world stage. Because when Lion Air happened, Boeing was not grounded by the Indonesian, but when the Ethiopian Airlines incident happened, Ethiopia grounded all the Boeing 737 MAX 8 planes. And every other country, superpower countries, followed suit. China followed, Russia followed, Turkey followed, even, part of in the US, they followed. All these countries. Kenya followed in different African countries as well. So that was a power move. That brought the whole conversation to a completely different direction. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so we wanted to show all of that, but with all the limited resources that we had, with all the limited access that we had, we managed to tell the story. And then, at the end, when he told me that, I was like, oh my God.
I know. Just imagine if you had gotten all the stories that you had actually wanted.
Do you know what someone from the airlines told me? He said, oh my God, Hadra, had we known it would be this.
No, you didn't.
Seriously, we'd have given you all the information you need. And I said, no, you see, that's the thing.
Yeah.
We're not always to get you. We're not always there to tell bad stories. We're not always, it's because that's what they always think. They think we're always trying to do that. No, but it's not. When we do the story, we do it from our heart because we believe in it. And at the end, it shows.
Exactly. So this documentary got seen. And it was only on ABC, right?
Yes, available on ABC and in Hulu. And
I think it's on YouTube. I got to see it.
Yeah, on YouTube as well, yeah.
It's on YouTube now. But I guess they put it on YouTube recently because you had to be a member to actually watch it.
Yeah.
So now that it came out, everybody got to see it. How did it even get to the nomination? I just want you to walk us through.
I had no idea it was nominated. Nope.
Really?
It was just one morning that I got a text and I was told falling from the sky one. I was like, what?
I know.
Yeah, but we didn't know he was even nominated. I did not even expect, because the moment he told me, I said, okay. And I told Nugusu, and he said, are you serious? Is your name on the list? I was like, what list? And then he had to download like pages and pages and
Yeah,
pages.
I got to see your name on the list.
Yes, all the primetime Emmy
Yes.
winners were there, and he saw my name and he said, "Your name is on the list," and I was like, "Oh my God, okay." I was so surprised because I've been part of multiple productions that were either nominated or won something, but my name has never been included. It's always, people in the production or like the other people I worked with, and I never honestly in my life imagined that my name would be included on the Emmy nominations list, and I never thought. And then I said thank you very much, and the producer Jerry is such a really good human being.
Huh?
Like he has a good soul. And I've been excited ever since.
Ever since, right? Yeah. Well, I, including my audience, together say congratulations.
Thank you again.
Thank you for bringing it home.
Thank you again.
Because it's a big deal.
Yes.
You are the first. And this is because there's always a first for something. And when that first person actually does it, and how they do it also is mind-boggling.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean? Despite all you went through, you came out with an Emmy. That's just...
The documentary is available. Anyone can see it.
And I think they should.
The documentary, the reason it came out, it was shown on the eve of Thanksgiving.
Wow.
Imagine the timing.
Wow.
Because Boeing was giving the go-ahead to return to the skies again. And so the documentary questions, demands answers. Is the plane safe? Are passengers safe to take the Boeing? And in everything that happened between Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines and Boeing, and every incident that happened at the Congress and their offices and all of that, it really, really brings out that Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines were not at fault.
Exactly.
You see, and I really hope that through this, we'll be able to tell our leaders, our officials, our people that it's possible to tell our stories and come out on top.
Absolutely.
Without, compromising anything of our own.
Exactly. Pan-Africans and media. There was, when all of this fake news and stuff came out 3 years ago, it was said that Africa needed its own media house. Correct? You're mighty quiet on that one.
Africa needs its own media because I have a problem with that statement.
Yeah.
Africa is not a country.
True.
Africa doesn't need its own media. African countries, Africans have their own media outlets in these parts of the country.
I think
we
what
do not
they meant
utilize it.
That's very true. So having media outlets like an AU media thing, I think that's what the vision was to have a representation, just like the African Union is, but in that sense, in a media house.
What different concept or content are they bringing to media? Look, starting a media company is not an easy job.
No.
You need a lot of funding. There's so many things that you need to start a new media outlet. And instead of coming up with a media, why not support these media outlets that already exist? We're not asking for a completely different outlet or a platform. We're demanding to be represented on the BBC, a British broadcasting corporations. We're demanding, a representation from CNN, an American media. We're demanding from Euronews, from TRT. These are media outlets within their own countries that focus on their own countries, their own politics, their own issues. But because they're massive, massive companies, they have managed to diversify their content. So they have BBC Arabic, they have Focus on Africa, they have BBC Swahili, all of that.
Exactly.
Does nation media, the one in Kenya, are they in a position to have that kind of diversified content? No, they don't. Yes, of course, they have Nairobi office, they have Mombasa office, but it's impossible for them to start Nation Amharic because they don't have the funding. It's impossible for them to have, like Nation Creole, for instance, or Nation Pigeons to cover Nigeria, because they don't have the source. What we need to do as Africans, or as, I don't know, African billionaires who have a dream of, starting a media outlet, don't start a new one. Build on the ones that exist. Yes, support the one that exists.
Because I remember the reason that was even said was because not enough was coming out of Africa, or the news that we were hearing coming out of Africa from other institutions was wrong. So in order to correct that, so I'm going to quote you, is you guys need to be given information. Lack of information is
lack of information, issue. Lack of funding, and then you'll yes, it's like, look, Al Jazeera or CNN or Fox News, or TRT and RT, because the stories, they are able to send their journalists to these African countries. They go through all the paperwork, the visa application, and all of that. But when they come here, they do their story. They shape it in a way that appeals to the audience, and they shape it in a way that it's able to get as many viewers as possible. So they tell it to their audience, which means their perspective.
Yeah.
And then imagine giving that opportunity for an Ethiopian to go do a story about Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Let me give you one example. In addition to the Emmy, I have a couple of international awards.
All righty then.
So one of those is an award called Rose d'Or Award. It's a European Union award. And the BBC a few years ago did a documentary about the Nile, the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam.
Okay.
And it is the first, until now it hasn't been done, it's the first 360 view of the great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And so in that, it includes a lot of aspects in that documentary. And one of those people that we spoke to is someone who in a small town, they live in a small town just right next, like a few kilometers away from the dam. And then, but they don't have power access. And so this guy, he's sort of like the young man of the area, and he supports children, he helps out in different households, he collects wood, he does everything in that village, and they really love and respect him. And one of the things when we asked him, he said, I am a very energetic person. Like I have visions, I have imaginations. If we had power, I'll be able to produce something, out of wood, all these trees. If we had power, I'll be able to help these children study. We'll be able to get access to, computers and the internet. He even said we'd have a refrigerator.
Wow.
To cool water so that we could drink. We could do metalworks, all of that. And you know what? That person, every time, Ethiopian officials or water experts, every time they talk about how Ethiopia deserves, and it's our right, obviously, to build the grid, they always bring the women at Ntoto. I'm not minimizing their suffering, honestly, of Ntoto people, and I'm not saying they shouldn't be represented, but stories like that young man who had vision to, change his community, to change his life, to bring some sort of, diversification in his area. He should also be someone that we need to tell the story about.
But then, wait, if you're talking about GERD, why are you talking about the Ntoto people?
Because every promotion about how Ethiopia is entitled to have the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the first image that comes to people and that's being sold to the international community is the mothers who carry wood on Entoto Road. So because they use that wood for fire, for
Like
for
food, everything.
basically for their
Exactly.
life, and it's also their source of income.
Exactly.
So that's the first thing that's been said. Even the campaigns about this mother, all of that, but
You understand why I said that,
yes,
right?
Yes, I understand.
Don't they have a story to be told
Yes.
on that side?
That side, that's what I'm saying. Like diversify
Your stories.
the stories.
That's basically your point.
Yeah, that's my point. Is basically
Exactly.
diversify the stories, without alienating someone or leaving. Yeah.
It's not taking away. It's a completely different story.
It's a completely different story, but the focus is just
life.
my issue is the focus is just on that one aspect. But there are so many different aspects, but that we can only tell that if we're able to tell it through our own experience. Because you see, I understand why that person is going through. I understand his dreams. I understand his ambition to change his community, why he wanted to start a woodwork, why he wanted to start a metalwork, or why he wanted to have a computer so they'll be able to get, information, or even have cold water from the fridge.
It's beautiful. So hopefully you'll do his story.
I hope so.
Yeah, I truly do.
I really want to go back, but
Now, on a personal note, how do you overcome diversity?
in every aspect.
In every aspect. Because you get to see and come in contact with very diverse people. And diverse work, for that matter.
Yes, I love diversity. I don't want to
Exactly.
use the word. Because, look, I am from a family from different backgrounds. Also maybe to just say it bluntly, I'm from a completely different ethnic backgrounds that I come from. It's a beautiful thing. And I grew up in Ethiopia, where, as diverse as it gets in every way possible. Our food, the way we talk, the way we dress, the way we do everything. We're very diverse people. And I would like to believe that I'm an open-minded person to learn about someone else's culture, to understand about someone else's in their journey to get a space, to ensure they have a space somewhere, ensuring that they're grounded, to have their freedom of expression in every form of art, And I really love that. I really love my Ethiopianness. And being Ethiopian, I believe, have opened me up in terms of seeing, understanding, being curious about other people's cultures and experiences and trying to understand them. Ethiopia is the cradle of humanity. Addis is the capital of Africa. And if I am a citizen of this country, and that's considered to be the capital of Africa, then that means there are so many similarities that connect me to my sisters and brothers who live in North Africa or South Africa or, in Senegal. And guess what? We do. Our
Exactly.
experiences are more or less similar. Our human interactions are more or less similar. That love and respect between ourselves, that deep-rooted sense of identity, that deep-rooted African identity is within us. We love our
Every one
food,
of us.
we love our clothing, we love our music. And that deep sense of loving who you are throughout the continent is deep-rooted in me because I live in the capital of Africa.
Well said.
It's impossible for me not to be diverse and love diversity.
Exactly. We have to feed on it. It's a
Definitely.
good way of growing.
Yeah.
It's a good way of learning. And also, none of us are one. You know what I mean? We ourselves, as you said, you and your whole family is so diverse, every one of us has that within us if we are accepting of it.
It's a personal journey.
Exactly.
It's a journey of loving yourself. It's a journey of understanding who you are. You know, every time, like even in general terms, we talk about self-love. We talk about how we deserve to be loved or to love someone else. We talk about our journeys, the adversities that we overcome, the challenges we face and we, you know, topple. All of that, for me, finding my Africanness, loving my Africanness, my Ethiopianness, it's a personal journey. Because the representation of Africa and Ethiopians, specifically Ethiopians in the whole world, is something that would, you know, push you to hate who you are. You know, to say, I hate being here. The travel restrictions all over the world that you have as an African. Do you know that Ethiopia's passport ranks in the world?
In what way?
The power of the passport.
Oh, the power of the passport.
Yeah. That shows you how difficult it is to travel.
Yeah.
A US and UK citizen can't go to 35, 34 countries
with no visa
or
Let
even
that
with
be
visa
known.
arrival.
Thank you.
But then in all of that, really believing in your continent, believing in your country, and then believing in yourself, actually admiring your history, understanding it, the constant push that you do to find out any information about Africa, you know, is very limited. In all of that, or it's misrepresented, all of that is a journey to self-love as Africans that we go through. And I really admire and appreciate every African person who decides to love and respect their continent, their fellow humans, their fellow Africans.
Therefore yourself.
Therefore yourself.
Exactly. Now, Hadra, what do you think is the public's perception towards journalists? Our public perception, Ethiopians. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing?
It's divided. You know? It's not good or bad.
Or bad, good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Being a journalist in the past used to be respected. You know, it was a respected profession. It was a title like like you say I'm an engineer, or you say I'm a doctor, and then you say I am a journalist. So it's a sort of like a title. And even after you start being a journalist, we still go back to being a journalist and say I am a journalist. You know, we don't say I am a former journalist. We still say I'm a journalist. That's how respected and admired the profession was. If you say you are a journalist, people see you and put you in a high standard. They believe that you're not going to lie. They believe you're not going to talk about something that you're not sure of or something that you do not know. They believe and trust you to tell you their perspectives or what's going on in their life because they trust that you would be able to tell it to the responsible, show it or inform the responsible body that can help them. So it was a profession that was really respected and loved. But
when
recently,
did it decline?
For Ethiopia, it declined in the past 3-4 years because the stories that were being reported, especially by media outlets that we respected and we looked up to and we quoted for our own, for stories that happen in our own countries, the stories that were coming out were not something that the public wanted to hear. Because what's happening within the country and the story that what's being reported were not similar. It's not every media outlet, it's not all international media outlets, but some media outlets really did represent like what we go through every day. When it is reported, it's completely different. And then you say like, I live here. I know this is not what happened. And so people started questioning, you know, that is it really
the media?
People started questioning the media. One very popular example I can give you is the story that was published on CNN about the TPLF being just at the doorsteps of Addis, and there was a picture and all of that. But then it was analyzed, and the story turned out to be fake. If you ask me personally, that story really, like, it really made me sad. You know, I was really sad because for Ethiopian journalists to do a story like that, to get access to do any story like that and report it whether to local or international media outlets, it's impossible. But they managed to get access. But then the story they came up with, finally when it was analyzed, was a fake story. And because of that, access was restricted. There were so many policies, like at least short-term policies that were being announced, and most of them, those policies were targeting local journalists. And so it was for me a disrespect as a local journalist who struggled to get any information. It was a disrespect to see for the profession, to see that for an institution that understands, that covers the Middle East, that covers African countries, war-torn European countries, for a media outlet that understands how important it is to get access and actually to tell what's happening on the ground. And when they didn't do that, I was
saddened, to say the least. I know. Those are things that does break one's heart, especially when you are in that profession and you could have given a more humanly.
Yeah, there were so many ways to do that story. I mean, there was no reason to fabricate a story. There was no reason. You have the access, you've got the access, you've got everything you need, and yet, but why?
Well,
it's just that.
That's another interview.
It's just.
So now we're going to go into Afrofuturism.